Hello everyone, my name is Kin. Today I'm going to talk about occupational disaster of silicosis, which occurred during the construction of Hawks Nest Tunnel near Gauley Bridge, West Virginia in 1930. My presentation today will begin with purpose and objectives of the presentation. Then I will provide the background information of the incident. Next, I will compare silica dust exposure in Hawks Nest Tunnel with today's OSHA silica exposure standards. Then I will talk about the disease progression, the overall death rate of the incident, and how this incident disproportionately affected certain communities. Lastly, I will discuss what US have done so far to prevent tragic disaster like this in the future. The purpose of this presentation is to provide context for the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster, increase public awareness of the after effects, educate prevention methods to the public, and discuss the established interventions for the occupational silicosis. Silicosis is a fibrotic disease of the lungs caused by respirable crystalline silica dust. It is usually caused by long-term exposure to silica particles smaller than 10 micrometers. Occupational exposure to respirable sized silica particles include mining, quarrying, drilling, sandblasting activities. Though silicosis is incurable, it is preventable if proper safety measures are used. However, the ignorance of Union Carbide Chemical Corporations was the causation of the disaster. Hawks Nest Tunnel is a 3-mile-long excavation through Gauley Mountain in West Virginia. The purpose of the tunnel was to expedite water flow from New River for hydroelectric power. Though most of the tunnel was excavated by drilling and blasting through sandstone, which is known to have a high silica content, workers were given little or no protection equipment. Moreover, work areas were poorly ventilated. Though wet drilling methods were required for the project, dry drilling methods were mainly used during the mining process except for the times when inspectors visit the site, as water use slowed down the mining process by as much as 50%. Despite these circumstances, hundreds of men were hired to dig up the tunnel as employment was rare because of the Great Depression. The majority was African American men from the southern states. An estimated about 5,000 men worked on this project, and about 3,000 workers, mostly black workers, worked underground in shifts of 10 to 15 hours, drilling and blasting through rocks with high silicon levels. To compare with today's OSHA silica standard for construction, we can see that the exposure in the tunnel was very high and exceeding OSHA permissible exposure limit, as workers claimed that the vast amount of silica dust in the enclosed space caused them to impair vision in the tunnel. In this photo, you can see the worker is surrounded by dust even at the entrance of the tunnel. The combined effects of long exposure to toxic gases and silica dust, long working hours, and lack of proper respiratory equipment, many workers became sick within months. Because of the long exposure period and disease fast progression in the short period of time, it was assumed to be acute silicosis, which is highly fatal. Men working in a Hawk's Nest tunnel rarely lasted more than a year before becoming so sick they could no longer work. Approximately 764 workers died from acute silicosis, and an additional 1,500 workers ultimately developed various lung diseases, such as lung cancer, many years later. In this graph, you can see that African American workers were exposed to high silica content compared to their white counterparts, as black workers were segregated and tasked to do more dangerous work because of the racial discrimination during that period. Therefore, 75% of the affected workers were African American workers. This project is known as one of the worst industrial disasters in U.S. history and had the death rate of 152.8 per 1,000 workers. It is ranked as third deadliest construction project globally due to its significantly high death rate of the workers. However, because of its high death rate, this workplace disaster gained national attention. Therefore, the use of dust suppression and respiratory protection use was increased among workers exposed to silica. This tragedy brought recognition of silicosis as occupational lung disease and compensation legislation to protect workers. After 1937, 46 state governments incorporated silicosis into state workers' health compensation schedules. In 2000, U.S. government classified crystalline silica dust as a known human carcinogen. Today, it is required to use a respirator with an assigned protection factor of at least 10 if a worker is exposed to silica more than 10 hours per day outdoors or anytime indoors. As you can see, this is a decreasing prevalence of silicosis in recent decades, as workplaces take more precaution to avoid this deadly but preventable disease. To summarize, silicosis is a fatal, incurable, but with a proper safety measure, it is preventable. To avoid this terrifying disease, effective dust control measures must be implemented even when there is a slight chance of exposure to silica dust. Due to its preventable nature, many health and safety agencies around the world exercise close supervision to further reduce death from occupational disease. Thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.